Are you neglecting your children so they end up at children aid so they could be adopted by somebody that they don't look like? People, this is a disturbing, troubling case where the Black community is not talking about, where there's not enough media coverage. 2 white parents, adopted 4 Black children, have them in a shed. No bedding. Listen, it's a disturbing and troubling. I won't even drag it out. Hear it for yourself.
Breaking to watch as more information unfolds. Can you now bring us up to speed on all of the major developments that we know from the court so far?
Well, Peyton, Gina, this trial now heads into week 2, and the state has still not rested its complex case, as we have heard from neighbors, police, experts, and now we're to the point where we are hearing from the children victims. But we do want to warn you, some of the footage we've seen in court so far is difficult to watch. It's been 4 days of emotional testimony and hard-to-watch evidence, all leading up to one of the victims, the oldest child, taking the stand on Friday as she detailed years of abuse from White Feather and Lance, taking us all the way to the moment she and her brother were found locked in that Sissonville shed in October of 2023. But it's hard to say where this situation would be today had it not been for the first 5 people who took.
And I want to interject. So you see, when it happened in 2023 and they're just having a trial now, thank God for the nosy neighbor that saw something that was wrong and highlighted it and called children aids and called the police. These kids were locked up in a shed. People, shed like dogs. When they're ready, they call them monkey and all kind of things when they're ready. Hear it for yourself.
The stand on Tuesday, the Sissonville neighbors and a home health worker. They immediately noticed in May of 2023 when White Feather and Lance moved in that something was not right and began calling CPS and law enforcement about it.
I was afraid that they would move away and those little kids, nobody would be there to help them.
To the neighbors, it was the children's work in the yard and the standing in a line in all weather that seemed inappropriate for their ages. They said the work never came with any kind of play or break, and one of them even confronted Lance about it, which he denied, saying that they did play. And then when the neighbors began suspecting that 2 of them were locked in a shed, it was this October 2nd, 2023 call to the non-emergency line from home health worker Candace Hilbert that brought police to the shed.
He has 2 kids locked in an outbuilding. They've been in there for days.
And then the jury heard from police officers involved, from the deputy who did the initial check and helped break down the locked shed door to lead investigator Lieutenant Anna Pyle with the Kanawha County Sheriff's Office, who walked us through 5 days of camera footage of the children. Lance and White Feather kept motion-activated Arlo cameras on the children, one in the shed on the 14-year-old boy and 16-year-old girl, and one in a room upstairs with no bed, only a tarp floor that stayed on the 9-year-old girl and 11-year-old boy. The video showed a daily routine of waking up early and being forced to stand with hands on head, unable to change or shower, receiving only peanut butter sandwiches to eat before going back to bed on the floor. In the shed, the teens used a camper toilet, holding a sheet up for each other to shield the other from the camera. Lieutenant Pyle said she first began hearing about this in August before the shed discovery, but testified could never quite get a hold of a CPS worker to follow up.
There was a contact made with a worker once, but there was no further contact.
You know why? Because they were a white family and they were Black children. So nobody really give a shit, allegedly. But if it was a Black mom doing those things so fast, they would have come to the door with the police officer. You understand what I'm saying? Be careful. Take care of your children so they don't end up in this kind of system. Because they will end up in some kind of home that they're only out there for the money and not the well-being of the children. Let's continue.
To coordinate going and making a visit to the residence together.
The jury saw days of video the Arlo camera saved, including the moments deputies busted in the door on the shed on October 2nd. The children were turned over to Child Protective Services, and when Lance and Whitefeather got back with 2 of the children that night, they were later arrested. But that was just the beginning of their charges and the investigation. On Friday, the jury got an inside look at Whitefeather's cell phone. This included text messages between she and Lance where they referred to the kids as monkeys and pigs.
What did I
Often
tell
Lance
you?
would describe physical punishment where he said he, quote, knocked one of them. We saw one text where Lance said, quote, somebody didn't say thank you, and his sandwiches disappeared. We also saw more video from Whitefeather's phone from their time in Washington that also showed yelling and physical abuse from Lance. A finance expert from the West Virginia Fusion Center, Alyssa Ledbetter, also took the stand on Friday. She broke down the adoption payments Whitefeather and Lance received from Minnesota. She said in total of what they analyzed from 2019 to 2023, the two received about $318,000 in adoption support payments, but she testified this didn't tell the whole story.
The assistance began in June of 2018.
Do you hear how much money they get to be adoptive parents? Let's continue.
And I only had from June of 2019 to November of 2023. So altogether, we're missing about 18 months.
All of this leading up to the most harrowing testimony so far on Friday afternoon from someone who lived it. We are not allowed to film or record the victims who will testify in this case, but we're in the room as the teen girl, now 18, but 16 at the time, shared what her life was like both in Washington State and in Sissonville. She said life progressively got worse with Whitefeather and Lance once they moved to the ranch in Washington in 2019. This is when the outdoor labor began, she said, and the physical punishments that included hits from a PVC pipe. While under a child services investigation there in Washington, eventually they moved to Sissonville, but she did not know why. She talked about how CBS was called soon after they arrived in West Virginia, and she detailed a visit from a worker who stayed on the porch and talked to them through the screen door.
What did I tell you? So where did the worker stay? On the porch. On the porch. On the porch, the worker stayed. If that was a black mom, he wanted to see where they sleep, what's in your fridge, blah, blah, blah. Do you work? Da, 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 da. All kind of story. So why she didn't go in to see where the children are sleeping and realize that the children are sleeping on the ground on a tarp? Why she didn't go in to go and look to see that the children were locked most of the time in the shed? Oh my. Let's continue.
Talked to them through the screen door. The teen testified she was not honest with CPS because Lance could hear her from where she was standing. Eventually, she and her teen brother, who has several mental health disorders, were locked in a shed in August of 2023. She said she went without a shower for 2 months and never changed clothes. She went from sleeping on a mattress to the floor with a sleeping bag. Her brother slept on the concrete floor with only cardboard at his head. She said she was forced to be his babysitter, but testified he was never the dangerous, violent kid that Lance and Whitefeather made him out to be. She recalled the use of physical violence, pepper spray, and racial slurs from Lance and Whitefeather. She recalled also being scared when police arrived at the shed, worried that she would say something to upset Whitefeather. Some of her more emotional moments came during cross-examination by Whitefeather's attorney, Mark Plants. At one point, he referred to Whitefeather as her mother, and she quickly corrected him. He questioned why some of her interviews before this contradicted what she said on the stand. But when Tuck asked her why she felt comfortable telling the truth now, she said, because I know I won't have to go back to that. Now, tomorrow morning, court is expected to get going around 8:30. 2 more of the children are set to testify, and then it will be the defense's turn to present their cases. Live in the studio.
And more evidence presented at the court, people. Remember, this happened in 2023. Not a lot of media coverage at all. Not a lot of people in the black community speaking about this at all. When there's problem in the community, we don't speak. So let's get into some more stuff that happened in this case.
Enforced labor after adopted children were found locked in a shed in Sissonville is set to go to trial on Monday. But this morning, attorneys hashed out some of the pretrial details, and in the process, we learned some more about this case, as Anna Saunders has that story for us tonight. But we do want to warn you before we show you the story that some of the images that you will see are disturbing.
Jeannie Whitefeather and Donald Lance walked into their last hearing ahead of their Monday trial to go over some of the concerns about what evidence and what testimony will be allowed to go before a jury next week. One of those matters is about an investigation into alleged abuse involving Whitefeather and Lance's treatment of their 5 adopted children before they moved to Sissonville
5
in
black kids.
2023. According to adoption records, Whitefeather and Lance adopted 5 black siblings from Minnesota in 2018 and moved to Washington State in 2019. It has been the argument from Kanawha County prosecutors that the two targeted the children because of their race to use them for forced labor. And according to recent court filings from prosecutors, including pictures from Whitefeather's phone and videos from the surveillance cameras they kept.
I want to show you guys some of these pictures. Look how they have the kids in the yard like any slave. Look at that. Look at that, you all. Look how they have the kids in the yard like any slave. Let's continue.
The children, the alleged abuse started in Washington and was even investigated.
See the pipe in his hand there?
The Okanagan County Sheriff's Office and their department.
Look. Look it. Let's continue.
Of children, youth, and families for a year before they moved to Kanawha County. According to the filing, they kept them on a large ranch in Washington, denying them bedrooms in the home and forcing them to work outside, where punishments included physical violence or the withholding of food. In 2 instances where 2 of the children tried to run away, the children told investigators Whitefeather would fire her gun at them.
You
And
there?
Mr. Lance's alleged
When they try to run away, she will fire her gun at them. Does that take anything buzz in your brain? Does that ring a bell? Obviously, back in the days, in slavery days, you all, when the slave used to run away, they used to send the hound dogs and bust their gun and shoot them in their back. Pow! Oh my. Let's continue.
Act of striking the child with the PVC pipe. We know about that only because there's a picture of it on Miss Whitefeather's cell phone, taken from their surveillance cameras that they used in furtherance of all of their other acts to isolate and control the children.
In April of 2023, the two moved to Sissonville with the children, where court records say immediately after their arrival, neighbors began making reports to CPS about the children being forced to work on the property, stand for long periods of time, and use a porta potty in the yard. And then ultimately the report of children locked in a barn, which led deputies to the Sissonville home in October 2023, where Lance and Whitefeather were arrested and later handed a 20-count indictment, including human trafficking, child abuse, and using a minor for forced labor.
They think that conduct in Washington during that 6 or 7 years is intrinsic to their case, and I agree with them. On the other side of that is my client's conduct in response to that is highly relevant and highly probative.
In response, Whitefeather's attorney Mark Plants is hoping to paint a different picture with text messages, medical records, and witnesses at trial that the couple is not racist and did not target or abuse these children. He is not objecting to the use of the Washington records because he plans to use information from Washington too. So does Donald Lance's attorney John Belinovich, but he is objecting to the use of the Washington abuse investigation since charges were never filed there.
What they're doing is they're trying to take things from these records in Washington to fit their narrative.
Some other issues that could come up at trial, whether or not Whitefeather and Lance are actually married, which could prevent them from testifying against each other. If they are, we do expect to hear from the children at trial, and Plants indicated on Friday that the plan now is for Whitefeather to also take the stand.
There's so much I can't.
So we're not going to drag this case out. So if you never heard about this case, you heard about this case over here first. If you're out here talking about children, the CMR story and all kind of story, well, these are 5 black children that you haven't spoken about. And if you're out here care about kids and abuse, well, you should have picked up the story because they're black children, and whether or not you know them, they're popular, and it's either CMR kids or Chrissy kids or whatever they are. At the end of the day, there were black children being abused, and you guys never saw this case. I wonder why. So if you're running down abuse, crying about abuse, neglect, then this is one case that you neglected and never ever cared about. Peace and love.